"I've loved you for a long time," confessed the drunken Apache woman, and the rancher's question changed everything. The rancher, a man who had spent most of his life in this quiet corner of the world, was finishing up his daily chores. The horses had been fed, the cattle checked, and the barn secured for the night. It was a life he knew well, one of hard work, long days, and the kind of peace that only comes with being in tune with nature. Yet, despite the calm of the evening, a restlessness had settled in his mind. Something felt different that day, though he couldn't yet put his finger on it. He wiped the sweat from his brow with the back of his hand and leaned against the wooden post of the barn. The air smelled faintly of hay, earth, and the lingering scent of smoke from the fireplace. From a distance, the sounds of the small town could be heard: laughter, music, and the occasional shout. The rancher usually avoided the town after work. He preferred the quiet of his land, the companionship of his animals, and the stillness that allowed his thoughts to wander freely. But tonight, something tugged at him, a curiosity he could not ignore. With a sigh, he decided to take a short walk into town. The streets were dimly lit, with lanterns flickering along the wooden sidewalks. The town wasn't large, but it had a life of its own. People moved about with purpose, greeting each other warmly, exchanging news and laughter. The rancher walked slowly, taking in the familiar sights and sounds, yet his mind wandered elsewhere. He thought about the years he had spent here, the friends he had made, and the people he had known, some for a lifetime. Among those memories was one that had always lingered quietly, like a shadow at the edge of his mind: a woman. She was a native Apache woman, known in the town for her strong spirit and fiery independence. Her presence was always noticeable. She carried herself with a confidence that could not be ignored. Over the years, the rancher had seen her at different events, at the market, at town gatherings, and even passing by the ranch on occasion. Their interactions had always been brief, polite, yet there had always been a sense of unspoken connection between them. Something in her eyes seemed to recognize him in a way few people did, and he had always felt a curiosity and fascination toward her that he never fully admitted, even to himself. As he approached the tavern, he noticed that it was busier than usual. The sounds of conversation and music spilled out into the street, mingling with the cool evening air. He hesitated at the doorway, unsure if he should enter. Taverns were not usually his place. He preferred solitude over noise, and he was careful about the company he kept. But there was something tonight that drew him in, a feeling he couldn't quite explain. With a deep breath, he pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was warm, filled with the scent of wood smoke, ale, and the faint aroma of cooking from the back. People turned their heads briefly as he entered, nodding in greeting before returning to their conversations. And then he saw her. She was sitting alone at a corner table, her figure slouched slightly, her hair falling messily around her face. Her eyes, however, were sharp, almost piercing, and they met his immediately. For a moment, the rest of the tavern seemed to disappear. The chatter, the clinking of glasses, the music, all faded into the background. It was as if time had slowed down, drawing his attention entirely to her. He approached cautiously, unsure how to speak or even what to say. She looked at him with a mixture of recognition and something else he couldn't quite place. Was it sadness? Longing? He could not tell. As he drew closer, she straightened slightly, taking a shaky breath as if preparing herself for something important. He could see that she had been drinking, her movements unsteady, her cheeks flushed. Yet there was an undeniable strength in her posture, a resilience that had always fascinated him from afar. "Evening," he said softly, careful not to startle her. His voice seemed to break the tension slightly, and she offered a small, uncertain smile. It was the kind of smile that hinted at emotions carefully hidden beneath layers of pride and self-protection. "Evening," she replied, her voice low but firm. There was a tremor in it, a hint of nerves, but also an honesty that he found both startling and captivating. For a few moments, neither spoke. The noise of the tavern filled the silence around them, but between the two of them there was a quiet bubble of anticipation. The rancher could feel the weight of the years they had passed by, the moments of shared glances, unspoken words, and fleeting opportunities that had come and gone. It was as if this night had been waiting for them, quietly, for a long time. Finally, she took a deep breath, her hands gripping the edge of the table. I need to tell you something," she said, her voice almost a whisper but heavy with emotion. He leaned in slightly, attentive, sensing the importance of what was coming. She hesitated, a flicker of fear crossing her face, and then her words tumbled out in a rush. "I've loved you for a long time." The tavern seemed to stop. Conversations halted mid-sentence, music faded for an instant, and all eyes turned toward them. The rancher felt his heart skip a beat. The words were simple, yet the weight they carried was enormous. He had never expected such a confession, and yet, at the same time, a part of him had always known. Memories of fleeting moments, small gestures, and quiet exchanges replayed in his mind, forming a tapestry that now made perfect sense. He did not speak immediately. He simply looked at her, really looked at her, and in that moment he saw the vulnerability she had carried for so long. It was raw, unguarded, and entirely human. He saw the courage it had taken for her to speak her truth, even under the influence of alcohol. And he felt something shift inside himself, a mixture of surprise, curiosity, and an unfamiliar warmth. The woman's eyes searched his, anxious for a reaction. She had waited for this moment, carrying the weight of her feelings quietly for years. To hear her voice spoken aloud, to finally let someone else know, was both terrifying and liberating. He could sense her trembling slightly, the tension in her shoulders, the nervous tapping of her fingers against the table. And yet, despite her fear, there was an undeniable honesty that demanded recognition. The rancher finally spoke, his voice calm but steady. I didn't know." The words were simple, yet they carried the weight of his own realization. For a long time, he had been unaware of the depth of her feelings, perhaps because he had never allowed himself to consider the possibility. Now, faced with her confession, he was forced to confront his own emotions, memories, and desires. She exhaled sharply, a mix of relief and continued anxiety washing over her. Her heart pounded in her chest, but she felt a strange sense of freedom in finally admitting the truth. The moment stretched, filled with unspoken questions and possibilities. The tavern had returned to its usual rhythm, but for them, everything had changed. A new chapter had begun, one that neither could have predicted but both had somehow been waiting for. The rancher took a seat across from her, leaning slightly forward. He didn't know what the future held, nor did he try to guess. All he knew was that this night, this moment, had broken a silence that had lasted far too long. And in that, there was a promise, a chance to explore feelings long ignored, to bridge the gap between past and present, and perhaps to discover something neither had dared to hope for. Outside, the sun had disappeared completely behind the hills, leaving the town bathed in the soft glow of lanterns. The rancher and the Apache woman sat together, two lives intersecting in a moment of truth, courage, and unexpected possibility. It was the beginning of something new, fragile yet full of potential, and both felt the weight of what had finally been spoken. The rancher sat across from the Apache woman, his mind racing with thoughts he hadn't expected. Her words from moments ago, "I've loved you for a long time," still echoed in his ears, each repetition stirring emotions he had kept buried for years. He had always noticed her presence in the town, admired her quiet strength from afar, and occasionally felt a pull toward her in ways he didn't fully understand. Yet, he had never imagined that she had carried such feelings for him. The woman, still trembling slightly from the courage it had taken to speak, looked down at her hands. She twisted the hem of her sleeve nervously, ashamed of the tears that threatened to fall. Alcohol had given her the temporary strength to speak, but the raw honesty now made her feel exposed and vulnerable. She had hidden her feelings behind a mask of independence and pride for so long, fearing rejection and misunderstanding. Yet here she was, letting the rancher into her world, trusting him with a secret she had protected with her entire heart. He began slowly, searching for the right words. His voice was low, careful not to startle her, yet filled with sincerity. I had no idea, I never knew you felt this way. Her eyes lifted to meet his, filled with a mixture of hope and fear. I've tried not to, she admitted softly, her voice barely above a whisper. I thought it would change everything, and I didn't want to lose you as a friend. The rancher leaned back slightly, taking a moment to process. He had always respected her strength, admired her independence, and enjoyed the small interactions they had shared over the years. But this confession brought a new perspective, one that made him realize how little he had truly understood her heart. He studied her face carefully, the curve of her jaw, the depth in her eyes, the way her lips trembled as she struggled to control her emotions. Each detail painted a picture of a woman who had loved deeply and silently for far too long. You shouldn't have kept it inside, he said gently, surprising even himself with the tenderness in his voice. I might have felt the same way if I had known. Her breath hitched, and for a moment she looked as though she might break down completely. Relief and disbelief mingled in her expression, a complex combination of emotions that made her feel dizzy. She had waited for this moment, dreamed of it quietly in her mind, yet reality was far more intense than she had imagined. She felt a strange mixture of joy, fear, and anticipation all at once, a storm of feelings that left her momentarily speechless. The rancher continued, his voice steady now, though his heart beat faster with each passing second. Tell me everything. Why now? Why tonight? She hesitated, biting her lip, the uncertainty clear on her face. Then, taking a deep breath, she began to speak. I don't know why I couldn't say it before. Maybe it was fear or pride or just life getting in the way. I've watched you from afar, admired you, cared for you, and every time I saw you, I felt something I couldn't name. I tried to ignore it, tried to convince myself it didn't matter. But it did. It mattered more than anything. Her words hung in the air, heavy with sincerity and longing. The rancher felt a lump form in his throat, realizing the depth of her feelings and the years of quiet suffering she had endured. He had never thought of her confession as a possibility, yet now it seemed undeniable. He wanted to speak, to reassure her, to tell her that her feelings were not wasted, that they were seen, and that they mattered to him as well. You've carried this for so long, he said, his voice filled with empathy. It must have been difficult. I can't imagine how hard it was to keep it inside all these years. She nodded, tears threatening to fall, and looked away briefly, as though ashamed of the vulnerability she had revealed. It was. Every day I thought about telling you, but I was scared. I didn't want to ruin whatever we had. And now with everything Her voice cracked and she took a shaky breath. The rancher reached across the table instinctively, placing a hand near hers without touching, a gesture of reassurance. You don't have to explain everything all at once, he said softly. Just tell me what you're feeling right now, that's enough. She took another deep breath, steadying herself, and finally met his gaze fully. I'm scared, she admitted, her voice raw and honest. I've loved you for so long, and now that I've said it, I don't know what will happen. I don't know if you feel the same, and I'm afraid of being hurt or rejected or laughed at. The rancher listened carefully, his mind focused entirely on her words. He could see the pain and courage intertwined in every syllable. Her honesty struck him deeply, not because it was dramatic, but because it was real, heartfelt, and unguarded. He realized that her love was not fleeting or shallow. It had been steadfast, patient, and true. And he felt something shift inside himself, a recognition of his own feelings, a dawning understanding that perhaps he had been blind to them all along. "Look at me," he said finally, his voice calm but firm. She lifted her eyes slowly, meeting his gaze. "You have nothing to fear. I don't want to laugh at you or hurt you or dismiss what you feel. I want to understand. I want to know you, all of you, without any pretense or hesitation." Her lips trembled as she tried to smile, a mixture of relief and disbelief crossing her face. She had spent so long hiding her feelings, guarding her heart and fearing the worst. And now, hearing his words, she felt a lightness she hadn't felt in years. It was as if a heavy burden had been lifted, replaced by hope, curiosity, and a cautious excitement about what might come next. The rancher continued, his voice quiet, yet full of intent. "I can't promise I understand everything, or that I'll have all the right words. But I can promise this: I'll listen, I'll try, and maybe we can find out together." She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks despite her best efforts to hold them back. She felt a warmth spreading through her chest, a sense of safety and connection that she had longed for but never dared to hope for. I would like that," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. I want to be honest with you with no pretenses." For the next few minutes they sat in silence, allowing the weight of the confession to settle between them. The noise of the tavern returned gradually, the laughter, the music, the chatter. But for them, it was as if time had slowed. Everything outside the little bubble they had created seemed distant and irrelevant. All that mattered was the shared understanding, the courage to speak the truth, and the first tentative steps toward a new chapter neither of them had dared to imagine. As the evening wore on, they began to talk more freely, sharing stories, memories, and experiences that had shaped them. The rancher learned about her life, her struggles, and the quiet resilience that had carried her through difficult times. She learned about his world, the challenges of the ranch, and the solitude he had embraced for so long. Each revelation brought them closer, creating a sense of intimacy built on honesty, respect, and genuine curiosity about each other's lives. By the time the tavern began to empty, and the lanterns outside cast a soft glow on the street, the tension between them had eased. There was still uncertainty, still questions about what the future might hold, but there was also a sense of possibility, a feeling that something significant had begun. They had crossed a threshold, stepping into a world where honesty and courage could open doors long closed. The rancher offered to walk her home, a gesture that she accepted with a shy smile. As they stepped out into the cool night air, the stars twinkling above them, the weight of unspoken feelings had transformed into something tangible, a connection neither of them could ignore. And as they walked side by side, sharing quiet conversation and tentative laughter, both knew that tonight had changed everything. It was no longer just a confession. It was the beginning of a journey, one that neither had planned but both were willing to explore. The night had settled fully over the town, the streets quiet except for the occasional creak of a wooden sign swinging in the breeze. The rancher and the Apache woman walked slowly, their steps measured, careful not to rush the fragile connection that had formed between them. Each glance, each word carried weight now, a mixture of curiosity, hope, and the kind of hesitation that comes with years of unspoken feelings. The tavern had faded behind them, leaving only the soft glow of lanterns and the cool touch of the night air. For a while neither spoke. It wasn't uncomfortable silence, rather, it was a shared space of reflection. Both were aware of the significance of what had just happened. Her confession had pierced the quiet of his heart, bringing long-ignored emotions to the surface. And now, walking together under the stars, he felt the subtle shift in the world around them. Everything ordinary seemed different. The air felt heavier, the night brighter, and the possibility of something new filled him with both excitement and apprehension. Finally, the rancher spoke, his voice calm but deliberate. "Why did you wait so long?" he asked, not in accusation but in genuine curiosity. She paused, startled by the question as if she hadn't expected him to ask something so direct. She began, her voice catching slightly. I was afraid of being rejected, of being laughed at, of losing what little friendship we had. I thought if I kept my feelings hidden, I could avoid the pain, but it didn't work. It never worked. He nodded, understanding the fear that had held her back. I never realized, he said quietly. I never knew how much you cared. His words were honest, tinged with a mix of regret and empathy. He wished he could have seen sooner, wished he had understood the depth of her feelings before now. Yet, he also recognized that the present moment was all that truly mattered. The past could not be changed, but the future, if they dared, could be shaped together. She looked at him then, her eyes searching for any hint of judgment, any sign that he might reject her outright. Instead, she found only openness and a genuine desire to understand. That alone was enough to ease some of the tension that had gripped her since the moment she had confessed her love. Slowly, a tentative smile began to form on her lips, fragile but genuine. You don't have to answer right away, she said softly, her voice almost a whisper. I needed you to know. He shook his head, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. No, I need to answer, he replied, because your words, they matter. And I realize now that I have questions too, questions that I should have asked long ago but never did. He hesitated, then continued, his tone serious yet gentle. Tell me, have you ever imagined what it would be like if we tried, if we explored this together? Her breath caught. She had imagined it, of course, countless times in quiet moments alone, but to hear him say it aloud, to know he had thought of it too, was a sensation both exhilarating and terrifying. She stammered, struggling to find words. I don't know what to say. I've dreamed of it, yes, but I never thought it would happen, not like this. The rancher stopped walking for a moment, turning to face her fully. The moonlight cast a soft glow on her face, highlighting the emotion she tried to hide but could not. We don't have to rush, he said gently. I'm not asking for a decision tonight, I need to understand you better, and I hope you want to understand me as well. She nodded, her eyes glistening. I do. I want that more than anything. The words were simple, yet they carried a depth of sincerity and longing that left him momentarily speechless. He realized then that this was not just about love. It was about trust, about courage, about two people finally allowing themselves to be seen fully by another human being. As they continued their walk, they began to talk more freely, sharing small stories and memories that had shaped them. She spoke of her childhood, of growing up in a world that often misunderstood her heritage, of the struggles she had faced in maintaining her independence while yearning for connection. Her voice, though soft, carried strength, and he listened intently, absorbing every word. He shared his own experiences, the long days on the ranch, the isolation he had chosen for himself, and the moments of quiet reflection that had defined his life. He spoke of the loneliness he had sometimes felt, the longing for companionship he had never admitted, even to himself. As they exchanged stories, they discovered common threads, values, dreams, and experiences that bridged the gap between their worlds. The conversation naturally shifted back to the present, to the moment that had brought them together under the stars. I never thought I'd hear you say that, she admitted, her voice tinged with awe. That someone like you could even consider it. It feels unreal. He smiled, a small, reflective smile. I never thought I'd hear you say it either, but here we are, aren't we? And I think maybe it's time to stop imagining and start understanding. Her eyes widened slightly at his words. Understanding, yes, that's all I've wanted. To be understood, to have someone truly see me, not just my appearance or my actions, but my heart. And tonight, I feel like you finally do. He nodded, feeling the weight of the moment settle over them. There was still uncertainty, questions about the future, about how their lives might intertwine, about how the town might react. But there was also a sense of possibility, a quiet optimism that had been missing for years. They were standing on the edge of something new, fragile yet full of potential, and both were willing to take the first steps together. The rancher then asked the question that had been forming in his mind, the one that would change the course of their interaction entirely. If we explore this, will you trust me? Will you let me in without fear or doubt? Her gaze softened, and for the first time that evening she smiled fully, a smile that reached her eyes and illuminated her face. Yes, she said firmly, her voice steady despite the lingering tremor of nerves. I will. I've waited too long to hold back now. I trust you and I want to see where this goes. The rancher felt a rush of emotion, a mixture of relief, excitement, and deep gratitude. Her answer, simple yet profound, opened a door he had long hesitated to approach. It wasn't a promise of perfection or certainty. It was a commitment to honesty, to exploration, and to the courage to face whatever might come. And that, he realized, was more meaningful than any declaration of love or certainty could ever be. They walked the rest of the way in a comfortable silence, the earlier tension replaced by a shared understanding. Each step seemed lighter, more deliberate, as if the weight of the past had been lifted and replaced with hope. The night air, cool and crisp, carried the promise of change, a gentle reminder that life could shift in unexpected ways when courage and honesty intersected. By the time they reached the edge of town, near the small bridge that crossed the creek, they stopped to look at the water below. The moon reflected off the surface, creating a path of silver that stretched across the rippling waves. It was peaceful, serene, and symbolic, a moment of reflection, of transition, and of possibility. You know, the rancher said quietly, tonight has changed everything, not because of what was said, but because we finally allowed ourselves to speak the truth. And that makes all the difference. She nodded, her eyes shining in the moonlight. It does, and I think maybe it's the beginning of something good, something real. They stood there for a moment longer, letting the night surround them, savoring the quiet intimacy of shared understanding. There were still questions to answer, challenges to face, and fears to overcome, but the first step had been taken. The confession had opened the door, the conversation had built a bridge, and now they were ready to explore the possibilities together. Finally, the rancher spoke again, a hint of humor and warmth in his voice. So, where do we go from here? She laughed softly, the sound carrying a lightness that hadn't been there before. I don't know, she admitted, but I think we take it one step at a time, together. And with that, they began walking back toward the town, side by side, hearts lighter, minds open, and spirits lifted. The night had shifted, their paths had intersected, and something extraordinary had begun, born not of certainty, but of courage, honesty, and the willingness to embrace the unknown. The following days passed slowly, yet in a way that made time feel both heavy and light. The rancher returned to his routines, tending to the land, the animals, and the quiet solitude he had long cherished. Yet, in the spaces between chores, his thoughts wandered constantly to the Apache woman. He found himself replaying their walk, her confession, and the honest conversation that had followed. Each memory lingered like a soft echo in his mind, stirring feelings he had never fully explored. For her part, she moved through her days with a mixture of anticipation and nervous energy. She went about her tasks, interacted with friends and neighbors, but her thoughts frequently returned to him. The initial relief of confessing her feelings had transformed into a cautious hope. She wondered how he truly felt, whether his words had been sincere, and what the future might hold if they chose to explore their connection further. The uncertainty was both thrilling and frightening, but she had made her choice to be honest, and she was determined to face whatever came next. One afternoon, the rancher decided to visit her. He approached her home slowly, aware of the significance of this step. He wanted to show that he cared, that he valued her honesty, and that he was willing to engage in the next chapter of their story. As he walked up the path, he noticed the familiar surroundings, the small garden she tended, the simple, sturdy structure of her home, and the items scattered around that reflected her life and personality. Each detail reminded him of the depth of her individuality, and he felt a renewed respect for the woman he had long admired from afar. She greeted him at the door, a mixture of surprise and relief in her expression. "I didn't expect you so soon," she said, her voice warm but slightly hesitant. "I wanted to see you," he replied simply. "I've been thinking about us, and I realize there are things we need to talk about, things we need to understand before we move forward." Her eyes softened and she nodded. "I agree. There's a lot between us, our pasts, our fears, the way we see the world. We can't ignore any of it." They sat together in her small living room, the air filled with quiet tension and anticipation. It was time to face the unspoken truths, to confront the moments that had shaped their lives and the barriers that had kept them apart. The rancher began by asking about her past, the experiences that had defined her, the struggles she had endured, and the ways in which she had learned to protect her heart. She spoke openly, recounting moments of hardship, times when she had felt isolated or misunderstood, and the courage it had taken to maintain her independence while still yearning for connection. As she spoke, the rancher listened intently, absorbing every word. He realized that her strength had been forged through challenges he had only glimpsed, and he felt a deep admiration for the resilience she had cultivated over the years. Her honesty was humbling, and he began to understand the depth of her love, not a fleeting attraction, but a steadfast, patient devotion that had grown over time. When it was his turn, he shared the story of his own past, the responsibilities of managing the ranch, the solitude he had chosen, and the quiet moments of longing he had never voiced. He admitted the fear of opening his heart, the concern that vulnerability might bring disappointment or rejection. She listened carefully, her eyes never leaving his face, and he felt a sense of relief in sharing these truths. For the first time, he felt that someone truly understood him, that his experiences and emotions were not isolated but shared in a meaningful way. Their conversation naturally moved to their shared history, the moments of fleeting connection, the glances and small gestures that had passed between them over the years. They laughed at the memories, sometimes with embarrassment, sometimes with warmth, and slowly a bridge of trust began to form between them. The rancher realized that the walls he had built around his heart could be gently dismantled, one conversation at a time. The Apache woman understood that her patience and courage had not been in vain, that someone had seen her truth and was willing to meet her there. Yet, despite the growing sense of connection, there were still fears to confront. She worried about the judgment of the town, the whispers that might follow, and the difficulties of blending their lives when they had grown up in different worlds. The rancher, too, had concerns about responsibilities, the reactions of friends and neighbors, and whether their past misunderstandings could truly be set aside. They spoke openly about these worries, acknowledging the challenges without allowing them to overshadow the bond that was forming. "Life hasn't been easy for either of us," he said quietly, "but I think that's why we understand each other in ways others never could. We've both faced difficulties, and yet here we are, willing to try." She nodded, a mixture of relief and determination in her eyes. "I've always admired you, not just for what you do, but for who you are. And now, knowing that you're willing to see me, to truly know me, it gives me hope." They spent hours talking, their conversation weaving through memories, fears, hopes, and dreams. Each word built a foundation of trust, each shared story strengthened the connection between them. They realized that love was not simply an emotion, but a commitment to understanding, patience, and mutual respect. The rancher saw her not just as the woman who had confessed her feelings, but as a person with a rich history, unique strengths, and the courage to face life head-on. She saw him not just as a distant admirer, but as someone capable of empathy, reflection, and growth. As the evening drew near, the rancher suggested a walk outside. The air was cool, carrying the scent of earth and the faint aroma of distant smoke from nearby homes. They strolled together in silence, the night enveloping them in a calm embrace. It was a moment of quiet reflection, where words were unnecessary, and the simple act of being present with each other spoke volumes. They reached a small clearing where wildflowers grew in scattered clusters, their petals glowing softly under the moonlight. She paused, taking in the beauty of the scene, and he watched her with a sense of awe. "It's peaceful here," she said softly. "It is," he agreed. "And it feels like the right place for us to start to face the future together." She turned to him, her eyes reflecting the moonlight and the emotion she carried within. "I want that," she said simply, yet with profound sincerity. "I want to face it all with you, the past, the challenges, everything." He reached out, gently taking her hand in his. The gesture was simple, but it held immense significance, a symbol of trust, of willingness to move forward, and of shared commitment. They stood there for a moment, hand in hand, feeling the quiet power of connection and understanding. Over the following weeks, they continued to spend time together, gradually exploring their relationship while respecting the pace each needed. They worked on the ranch together, sharing tasks and responsibilities, learning more about each other through everyday interactions. They visited the town, slowly becoming more comfortable with public acknowledgement of their bond, and discovering that support often outweighed judgment. Each day, their trust grew, and with it, a deeper sense of companionship and affection. Through it all, they faced challenges, misunderstandings, moments of doubt, and external pressures. But each obstacle became an opportunity to communicate, to learn, and to strengthen the foundation they were building. They discovered that true connection required effort, patience, and the willingness to be vulnerable, and they embraced it fully. By the end of this period, the rancher and the Apache woman had moved beyond the initial thrill of confession and into a deeper, more meaningful understanding. Their relationship was no longer defined solely by the courage it had taken to speak the truth, but by the commitment to grow together, to face fears, and to honor the trust they had cultivated. It was a partnership built not on impulse, but on deliberate choice, mutual respect, and shared experiences. As they sat together one evening, watching the sun set behind the hills, she leaned her head on his shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her gently. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with the kind of peace that comes from knowing someone sees and accepts you fully. They had faced the past, confronted their fears, and chosen to embrace the uncertainty of the future, together. And in that quiet moment, beneath the fading light of day and the first stars appearing in the sky, they both understood something profoundly simple yet powerful. Love was not just about words, confessions, or fleeting emotions. It was about courage, honesty, trust, and the willingness to face life's challenges side by side. They had discovered it in each other, and that discovery had changed everything. The days turned into weeks, and the rancher and the Apache woman settled into a rhythm together. Life on the ranch, once defined by solitude and routine, now felt different. Each morning brought small joys, her laughter as she fed the animals, the way he noticed details she had tended to without being asked, the quiet moments when they worked side by side in perfect, comfortable silence. They had discovered that love was not only about grand confessions, but also about the gentle, everyday acts that built trust, understanding, and companionship. One morning, the rancher woke before dawn and stepped outside. The sky was painted in soft hues of pink and orange, the light spilling across the fields and warming the earth. He looked at the small farmhouse where she had spent the night, her presence now a constant in his life, and felt a surge of gratitude. The world had shifted in ways he had never expected, and yet it felt natural, as if this connection had been waiting for them all along. He thought of the first night she had confessed her love, of the courage it had taken, and he realized how much they had grown together since that pivotal moment. She joined him shortly after, carrying a basket of freshly picked herbs and flowers. Her eyes met his and a smile spread across her face, one that spoke of comfort, trust, and shared happiness. "Good morning," she said softly. "Good morning," he replied, returning her smile. "The land looks beautiful today. Almost as beautiful as it did the first time I saw you walk through town." She laughed lightly, a musical sound that seemed to blend perfectly with the morning air. "You really remember that?" "I do," he said with a grin. It was impossible to forget. As they prepared breakfast together, moving around the small kitchen with ease, they spoke of simple things, plans for the day, chores to be done, and memories from the past. Yet underneath the casual conversation was an unspoken understanding. They were building a life together, step by step, moment by moment. Each shared glance, each gentle touch, was a thread weaving their lives closer together. After breakfast, they went out to the fields. The rancher showed her how to check the fences, tend to the livestock, and manage the irrigation. She learned quickly, her determination and keen observation making her a natural at the tasks he had once done alone. They worked in comfortable silence, punctuated by the occasional comment or laugh. At one point, she wiped the sweat from her brow and looked at him, eyes shining with contentment. "I never imagined I could feel this, at home, in a place like this," she admitted. He smiled, his heart warming at her words. "It's not just the place, it's who you share it with, and now that we're together it feels right, doesn't it?" She nodded, her expression soft. "It does. I feel like I finally belong somewhere, with you." The words touched him deeply. Belonging had always been a complicated idea for both of them, she, with her past experiences of being misunderstood, and he, with his life of solitude and quiet self-reliance. But now, together, they had discovered that belonging was not about the land, the town, or even circumstances. It was about the connection between two people who saw each other fully and chose to remain. As the day wore on, neighbors passed by and greeted them, their initial curiosity tempered by the warmth and sincerity of the couple's relationship. Over time, the town had come to respect their bond, seeing it as a natural and genuine connection rather than something unusual or scandalous. The couple navigated the subtle social challenges with patience and confidence, always prioritizing the honesty and trust they had built between themselves. Evenings became a cherished time. They would sit outside on the porch, watching the sun sink behind the distant hills, the sky a canvas of deep oranges, purples, and blues. Sometimes they talked quietly about hopes and dreams, other times they simply held hands, content to feel each other's presence without speaking a word. In those moments, the world outside faded, leaving only the comfort and intimacy of shared life. One evening, the rancher asked her to join him for a walk through the nearby woods, a place he had often visited alone but now wanted to share with her. The moon was high, casting silver shadows across the path. The trees whispered gently in the night breeze, and the air was fresh and crisp. As they walked side by side, their fingers intertwined, they spoke of everything and nothing at once. The beauty of the night, the memories of their early encounters, and the unspoken gratitude they felt for finding each other. "I can't believe how far we've come," she said softly, glancing at him. "From that night in the tavern to now it feels like a dream." "It does," he agreed, squeezing her hand gently. "But it's real, and it's ours. Every step, every challenge, every moment has brought us here. And I wouldn't change a thing." She smiled, feeling a warmth in her chest that went beyond words. The journey had not been easy. They had faced fears, uncertainties, and doubts, but each obstacle had only strengthened their bond. She realized that love was not about avoiding difficulties, but about confronting them together with patience, understanding, and courage. Over time, their bond grew stronger through shared experiences. They celebrated small victories, the birth of a calf, a successful harvest, or a rare evening of rain that nourished the land. They comforted each other through challenges, whether it was a difficult day on the ranch, a worry about the future, or a moment of personal doubt. In every instance, they discovered that love was most powerful not in grand gestures, but in consistent support, empathy, and partnership. The Apache woman began to feel a deep sense of belonging, a fulfillment she had never known. She knew that her past struggles, her fears, and even the moments of hesitation had shaped her into the person capable of embracing this love fully. And the rancher, too, found a renewed purpose and joy in life, one that came from sharing his world with someone who understood him completely. One particularly quiet evening, as they sat beneath the stars, she rested her head on his shoulder and whispered, "I never thought I'd find someone who sees me, really sees me, and now I don't want to imagine life without you." He kissed the top of her head gently, a gesture of reassurance and devotion. "You'll never have to," he replied, "because I see you, all of you, and I choose you every day for as long as we're together." The words were simple, yet filled with profound meaning. They both understood that love was not a fleeting emotion or a passing infatuation. It was a conscious choice, a commitment to stand together, and a willingness to nurture the bond they had built over time. Months passed, and their life together became a blend of routine and adventure. They explored the surrounding hills, visited nearby towns, and shared quiet evenings on the porch. Friends and neighbors came to see them not as a curious pairing, but as a couple whose love was genuine, resilient, and inspiring. Each day, they learned more about each other, discovering new depths of character, humor, and compassion. As the seasons changed, so too did their relationship evolve. They celebrated their successes, faced challenges, and grew stronger in their understanding and love for one another. They had started with a confession in a tavern, a moment of courage that had altered the course of their lives. From that spark, a life full of trust, respect, and affection had blossomed, proving that true connection was both possible and profoundly rewarding. In the quiet moments, they often reflected on the journey that had brought them together. She remembered the fear and hesitation she had felt, the courage it had taken to speak her heart, and the transformative power of honesty. He recalled his surprise, his gradual understanding, and the realization that openness and trust could change everything. Together, they acknowledged that the greatest gift they had given each other was not merely love, but the courage to embrace vulnerability and the willingness to walk into the unknown, side by side. Finally, one evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in warm shades of gold and pink, the rancher took her hand and said, "No matter what comes next, I want you to know that I'm committed to us, to our life, and to this love we've found. We've faced the past, embraced the present, and now we step into the future together." Tears of joy filled her eyes and she smiled, feeling a sense of peace and fulfillment she had never known. "I feel the same," she replied, "and I'm ready. Ready for whatever comes next, as long as we face it together." And so, their story, which had begun with a bold confession in a small tavern, found its resolution not in grand gestures, but in daily acts of love, trust, and mutual respect. They had learned that real love required patience, courage, and honesty, and that the true reward lay in the journey itself. The small moments, the shared challenges, and the unwavering commitment to see and support each other fully. As night fell and the stars glittered above the ranch, they sat together on the porch, hands intertwined, hearts aligned, and spirits intertwined. The world around them was quiet, peaceful, and filled with promise. They had found each other, faced their fears, and embraced a future full of hope, love, and endless possibilities. In that quiet, shared moment, they knew that everything had changed and that the best was yet to come.